helped launch this Institute for Psychedelics and Death, and it's one of the impact branches of the film that we're here premiering at the Santa Fe International Film Festival. And the film is called The Last Ecstatic Days. And it tells the story of a beautiful young man who was a devout practitioner of psychedelic medicines. His name was Ethan Sisser. And we're so very fortunate to have Ethan's mom here, Linda, if you want to Linda just got to town. And so this is a pretty wonderful moment for all of us to be able to honor Ethan and to do a conversation around the role of psychedelics and death and storytelling and where they all intersect. And couldn't be a more appropriate place than Meow Wolf here for doing that talk. So thank you all for coming, and just to mention the bathrooms, I guess, are through the doors here, is that right? We'll talk for about 60 or 75 minutes, and then we'll see how everything flows. And today we have Leonard and Vince with us. Thank you guys so much for coming to have this conversation. I thought it would be great to start things off by asking, for both of you, where your relationship with psychedelics and death originates for each of you all. Is there any origin story or moment in your life where you felt like you developed some understanding of how psychedelics could be an offering for understanding the role of death?
Thanks for having me. It's great to be part of this conversation and to be, to be associated with this conversation through the work that we've done at Meow Wolf. I would answer that question in a couple. There's kind of two phases for me with regards to psychedelics and my experience with them, and both are related to death, I think, in different ways. When I was 17, 18 years old, I think I was seeking a release. I was seeking a surrender. I was hoping to move past the cage I found myself in, that for whatever, all the variables of how I got to being an 18-year-old in the body and in mind perspective that I was in, how to free myself of that, and how to put that self to bed, put that self, to rest, and to move into possibility, to move into the unknown. So that was what I did, and had a pretty remarkable few years of self-discovery largely through psychedelic medicines, being, kind of being the instigator. I had a situation in my early 20s through this process of taking too many mushrooms, or not necessarily taking too many mushrooms, but not having the language, the tools, the perspective, the pillars, the strength, the support system around me, the setting to handle a psilocybin trip. And it was a full-on, death attack. It was a full-on, I am dying and I am freaking out, and you need to take me to the hospital right now. And it was like the full-on for 5 hours, that experience. And I stopped doing psychedelics from the age of 23 until I was in my early 30s. So the second part of my journey was a facing of that. So when I chose to do psychedelics again 7-8 years later, it was a confronting of that, and very poignantly looking at, what is this? What is this fear? What is this avoidance? What is this ignorance that I, am so taken by? And so in the past decade, it's been almost the primary focus of my work, of my experience with psychedelics has been constantly facing that. And to me, it's related to, the acceptance of what is. Generally the acceptance of what is. Death being the thing that is, that we just don't want to admit is. And just being like accepting of what is has been like kind of the key aspect of my journey. So
let's see. My death experiences on psychedelics be limited to LSD, although there's no known lethal dose to it, as maybe with ayahuasca or even psilocybin. LSD has no known human lethality. My experiences date back to 1966, when I was 21 and first synthesized the molecule at the Retina Foundation in Boston. The first death experience was in '68 in the Haight-Ashbury, after millions of young people came to the Bay Area to discuss these phenomena. There were no adults we could talk to about it. The death experience of psychedelics can be frightening. It's the dissolution of the ego. It's the end of the world. Everything becomes unraveled. You ask yourself in the onrush of the phenomena, how can my heart keep beating? How can my neurons keep firing appropriately? This must be the end. That's extremely scary. But it continues. It's not a real physical threat, but at the time you don't realize that. As the process continues, there's a peace, a tranquility which occurs. Just relax and flow downstream. And flowing downstream, one feels the fear is replaced by a sense of ineffable grace. And this is what Ethan talked about in his many teachings during the dying process, which had moments of great fear, but he also had moments of tranquility and wisdom, which he gave to us, as Clara recorded in the film. So this film is extremely important work because it gives dignity to the dying process. During my life sentence in prison over 20 years, I saw people dying, just dropping down in the field, and one could not approach them or help them in any way. The guards would prevent us from assisting. People dying in small rooms with no family, no loved ones, no one to hold their hand, nothing, no dignity, no grace in that death. And so the film shows us that there are two ways that we can treat the dying. We can forget about them in hospital wards and let them go through their agonies alone. Or we can graciously bring in friends of the family and professional caretakers and hospice workers and seniors to comfort them. And that would be the hallmark, I think, of our civilization, is how we treat the dying, how we treat ourselves ultimately. Because now we're strong and vibrant and sharing this space, this existence. It's a moment in time where we're all together and alive and strong. But we'll all be weak and vulnerable and lost and weak and frightened one day. So we want to remember each other in those moments, the worst moments imaginable. And in Ethan's view, the very best moments imaginable, as Ethan considered the great adventure of death, like the great adventure since birth, that which is coming forward. And so Ethan had faith that would be the best thing of all. And may it be found.
Leonard, I really appreciate you just mentioned that a hallmark of our civilization is caring for the dying. And it feels like there's no coincidence that at this moment in time we have this kind of zeitgeist around care and consideration for the dying process, and also a lot of increase around psychedelic exploration and integration. I was wondering for both of you all, especially how we situate this in this context of the immersive art space. What do you feel is the role of storytelling in navigating the grief that comes with the dying process, or the grief that comes with the ego death during a psychedelic journey? How does storytelling land for both of you?
The storytelling, and also art, music, but also just envisioning generally, like the ability to, as conscious beings, to have imagined futures, is, in my experience, a non-physical thing. Like, it doesn't have weight. You know, imagination, dreams, the idea is weightless, matterless. It's invisible. It's spirit. You know, in a place beyond physicality, where there's no differentiation, there's no time to differentiate when, and there's no space to differentiate where. All is. And in that all is the possibility, is the imagination. Imagination, love, belief, spirit, these are all the same thing. We differentiate them down at this level, but that's because we live in a differentiated world, a differentiated dimension, a dimension that has differentiation, but where they come from are singular. And so, like, story for me is how humans have taken from that realm of possibility and implemented into this dimension. And it's been an increase. Like, I've oftentimes said, like, one of the craziest graphs that I don't think has ever been graphed, but it's an interesting graph to think about, is like the question, how many things have been created from the imagination? And graph that from 10,000 BC until now. And it's this crazy hockey stick. And it's a hockey stick that's not going to stop. And where does that take us? That takes us into the realm of story, purely. It takes us into the realm of dream, purely. Into the realm of imagination, purely, at all moments. I don't know when that happens, I don't know when that paradigm shift happens, but that's where we are headed. For me, that story, or that ability to tell a story, provides me a perspective on my end of life. And if nothing else, it makes me excited to see what's on the other side. Thank you.
Vince is a great storyteller, as you can see from this wonderful edifice. 10 years ago, merely a thought among young people, kind of holding hands in a house here in Santa Fe, and now this extraordinary immersive art exhibit. David Seibler, who could not be here today due to the flu, told a great story to Clara's the other night about the origin of storytelling. He spoke of many years ago when we were just basic hominids with limited verbal ability sitting around a campfire. And there were those who could speak and perhaps could tell little narratives. And then there were the warriors who went off and fought battles and brought home food. But the storytellers were often elderly women, the weak, if you will, and what strength they had was the ability to verbalize and to recount the glorious adventures of the warriors who went and brought the food. And that's how they survived. Storytelling was a way of surviving. So there was kind of a natural selection for storytelling. As you can see, look at this story. I have a little story for you on psychedelic death that occurred here in an LSD lab, if you will, out in La Tierra back in the 90s. The individual, chemist, who I won't name, was up a ladder tending a wall of glassware. And 3 in the morning with Gregorian chants playing and low light and candles and fires burning and all of this going on, and prayers being offered. And accidentally tapped a piece of glass at the top of the ladder, and 10 million doses of LSD, the strongest psychoactive substance ever known, drenched the individual from head to foot in the solvent that went immediately through skin. The individual fell off the ladder onto a pile of LSD in the solvent. And that's probably the largest human exposure, undoubtedly, by far, the largest human exposure known. All the literature does record examples of police seizing traffic stops, seizing little vials of white powder they thought was cocaine, and then surreptitiously using it. Those stories are in the Western Journal of Medicine. But this is unpublished. Certainly the largest exposure. So a short narrative on the effects thereafter, because it is absolutely a psychedelic death. The chemist, of course, screamed, but could not call an ambulance. After all, that would lead to living death. But somehow got to his feet and staggered into the shower, and turned on the shower and began frantically scrubbing the solution off himself as it rather rapidly went through the pores. Off he went. It's rather like a 5-methoxy-DMT experience that Vince can describe, but perhaps today. White light, worlds upon worlds, angels and demons singing, everything. And then into a front room where fires and odors were burning and walls were billowing. The visual field was just moving every conceivable direction. And somehow changing into a pair of Levi's and a work shirt. And going out to the portal on this property, 10 acres, in a beautiful full moon desert night at midnight, sliding down the wall in the lotus posture waiting to die. Because there are no reports of any human being exposed to this kind of quantity. And at that point, it's not just a large dose, it's a potentially lethal dose. And the individual sat there, and I'll try to report what he said. He said that as he sat there, waiting for enormous change or death or convulsions or seizures, nothing happened. The moon was rising, the beautiful terrain. He said he looked upon the most wondrous world that could possibly be imagined in the mind of God. The air, fragrant, like the perfume of goddesses. The ground, stones covered in jewels. The sound of night birds, little freshets of wind. The unity and harmony of all living things, and all the dying, all the souls of the dying crystallized. In that very moment, it was perfect. Not frightening, sublime, peaceful, ultimate grace. Perfect. And he said that was the world, he thought, as it truly is. Not a drug experience. He said, God, if you will, would not be so cruel as to make such majesty of our existence dependent upon some drug. but it was, in a way, the ultimate reality. It was ultimate intelligence, ultimate compassion, ultimate love. It was the greatest gift of all, the living, natural mind.
Thank you for sharing that. When you both were sharing just then, it felt like, in a way, this idea of the heroic dose is a little errant and off for how we should think about foraying or journeying into psychedelics. In a way, maybe we should, as a society, be thinking about the lover's dose, or the dose that allows you to feel self-love or feel compassion for other people in your community. And I was just wondering, when we talk about the psychedelic landscape, and obviously this notion of ego death or dying before you die, what do you all wish to bring to if you were to take a journey now or in the near future, what would you want to bring to that experience?
I mean, so much of the possibility of the work that we have in front of us around death also has to do with everyday perspective and sober perspective, because we're not going to be on drugs all the time. And, the perspective we just carry is also the perspective we carry not when we're on our deathbed, or not when a loved one's on their deathbed, but the one that we carry through life. And I think this goes back to storytelling as well, which is the power of metaphor, the power of perspective that story brings. The concrete example I have for myself around the story that I tell about death is it's pretty commonly, I think, accepted as a default that death is a thing we get to, that death is a mountain we climb, where death is the cliff we fall off of at some point. And flipping that to what I say is death is the pillow we lay our head on, or like death is not out there, it's right now, it's with us, it's embedded through life, it's the soil that life grows from. It's not what takes life away, it's what gives us the ability to have life. And so that flip, and like kind of the realization that this thing that happens in a moment, it's actually kind of crazy, like it doesn't actually happen. It's not in the moment that it happens, because the moment is the moment of life. It happens after the last moment of life. And in that, there's almost not even a moment there. So it's like, in some ways, it's always, and in some ways, it's already happened. It has already happened. And we're living our past life up to the point that it happened. And like having those flips, I think, allows us to have a different relationship with it, and embracing an appreciation for it, and which then in turn allows us to open our eyes to the life that we're living, and have the utmost gratitude for the conscious ability to experience and to love and to be with others and to create, The question that you had about what we take into a kind of paradigm shifting dose, or an ego loss dose. For me, I have a specific story, I guess. I've done Bufo alvarez by the Neo-DMT. I've done it 3 times. For those who aren't aware, by the Neo-DMT is a substance that is found in it's a chemical that's found in a toad known as the Bufo alvarez that exists in this northern desert, northern Mexico, southern Arizona. And its glands have a poison that is this chemical, and you can milk these glands, and you can dry it, and then you can smoke it. and the smoking of it is one of the, if not the most powerful psychedelic experience. And within less than 30 seconds, you go from sobriety to completely out. And there's a rapid movement to it. You're out for 10, 15 minutes, come back, and it's almost the coming back that is the real sort of tangible psychedelic experience, I'd say, is in the re-emergence to this world. And I've done it 3 times, and the most recent time was December 30th of last year. And so I was going through quite a difficult period of time, having lost Matt King in July prior, dear friend, brother, collaborator, who chose to end his life, and losing another artist who much of his work is out on the walls in the hallway here, Mikey Ray, who died of a fentanyl overdose, going through a breakup, and all sorts of things in my life, and I was having a really hard time. And I told myself I wasn't going to turn to Bufo as my savior, that it was on me to stand on my own 2 feet, and to get to a place where I was in a position where I wasn't broken, and in a position to utilize the medicine of Bufo to solidify, not to fix, but to solidify. And so leading up to it, I put the date, once I felt that feeling that I was on my own 2 feet, like I wasn't solidified, but I was on my own 2 feet, I then booked the date, December 30th, and from that point forward, I started to set the intentions. And the intentions were based on how do I choose to be? How do I choose to be? And ultimately it came down to like one main component, which is I choose to be okay. Like I am okay. This is the kind of the primary one. What it felt like to me was that I was bringing into the session a sense of an armature. Like if you're thinking about a psychological sculpture of sorts, I'm bringing into it an armature. And with that armature, the substance and the experience that the substance triggers is sort of like a sculpting medium that gets blasted onto the armature. But you need to have an armature there in order for any of that to stick. Then when I got out of the experience, the sculpture's not done because it's like an armature with a bunch of sculpting medium on it. Like it's not perfect. It's all, and this is what integration then is you then revisit the intentions of the armature, and you chisel, and you sculpt, and you paint, and you then start to form the psychological sculpture that you had originally intended. So I think all of that for these types of doses are incredibly important. Otherwise we're just kind of like, blah, like, oh my God, something happened, I don't know what, and I don't know what to do with it. So I think that context setting and that intention and the pre-work and the post-work is like fundamental to the power of these medicines.
Thank you.
Yeah.
For some years before life in prison, I was a Zen monk in a Japanese monastery. That's black robes and a lot of meditation. So imagine yourself, not barefooted, but in sandals with your robe on. It's 3:30 in the morning. You're going down to a 16th century Japanese zendo to sit in a lotus posture and face the wall and clear your mind of all thoughts. Before you enter that chamber, there's a wooden block suspended by ropes in every Zen monastery in the world from the ceiling, and there's a big mallet right beside it. There's a monk there tapping it slowly to let everyone know when the meditation starts. And inscribed upon every han in the world is the statement, "Awake, awake. Great is it a matter of birth and death. All things are passing, don't waste this life. It's quite an alarm clock. I think of Ethan going through his death process, and Clara's film with David is extremely graphic. There are moments it's difficult to watch, there are moments of great inspiration. Mostly it leaves you the feeling of being imparted with a great teaching. There are difficult moments like agonal respiration, when one struggles for breath, and one is afraid that one can't get it. Ethan did mention, and the New York Scientific Society has recently mentioned in a paper summarizing near-death experiences in which, as commonly reported, as we all know, one relives one's entire life in a few moments. But it reported something a little deeper than that, which was, one doesn't experience the arc of one's career, one's travel to the pyramids, or that sort of thing. One experiences, moment to moment, each deep instance of humanity in one's life. What one said to another person that gave them joy or pain, the emotional transmission between people, that is what is experienced. And it also reported that the person who is dying thinks that, assumes the personality of the person spoke to. For a moment you feel what the other person felt when you were speaking to them. You feel their joy uplifted at what you said, or their pain and the difficulty that may have been produced in them. So our life is not so much positions or vehicles or homes or cars. It's heart, 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 heart. Human, human, human. Feeling, feeling, feeling. And that is life. What happens truly when everything else is racing by? Vince has just spoken of his 5-methoxy-DMT experiences from the Sonoran toad. Of course, that's synthesized. And, hundreds of millions of dollars are flowing into this space for use of these materials in the treatment of the dying. There are corporations, existing corporations, boards of advisors, and scientific boards, and quite well established, that are looking at the employment of these substances as an adjunct for our honorable hospice workers to ease the grief and the fear and the distress, the existential distress of the dying process. An adjunct to morphine for pain. Psychedelics may be, in some instances, an adjunct to the existential grief or fear, the loss of the world, the fear of death. Apparently, the transition reports a feeling of coming to terms with a transition, that it may not be an enormous loss of all loved ones and all existence, and going into some meaningless, cold, dark non-existence, but into a greater glory, a greater warmth that one may have never felt, a greater love than one could possibly imagine, a walking into light and grace. And so that may be the realization of the use of these compounds, or the realization produced by a loving, experienced hospice worker in their care and grace in those last moments to give comfort. And that's not a drug. That is heart to heart to heart, heart to heart. Perhaps the most noble occupation, arguably the most noble occupation, of saying farewell with such beauty.
on the 5-MeO DMT experience as well, like I think just more concretely for myself, what I experienced and what many people who I've experienced it with have also experienced. For the 10 or 15 minutes that you're out, there is no self. But there is isness, but there's no self to even experience the isness. There's no self, there's not two, there's one. And so there's no memory of it, because that would take a self to remember. But when you start to come out of the experience, it's like there's these layers where you start, and it really quite profoundly feels like this construction, this differentiated construction that we call life, this time and space differentiated dimension that we exist within, is a byproduct of something, of the isness, of the oneness. Like, you feel that just like remarkably, where I experience this as fact now, after 5-MeO DMT, that this is a really amazing, like, formulation of reality. It's a really amazing like construction of reality and like form of it that allows us to feel differentiation and emotion and beginning, middles, and ends, and time and exploration, and like, but it's a construct that is a byproduct of something more core, more source, you know. And like, having that experience, even when you're not on, you know, struggling with end of life, but having that experience during life, it's like life-changing.
Feels like there's this sense of being held by the universe.
Being the universe.
Absolutely. For me, throughout college, I was obsessed with screenwriting, and that's what I was focused on out of school. And now that I'm in this psychedelic and death experience, there's just the infinitude. You know, you mentioned imagination. So many new stories can come here from this, you know. I know from Bufo, there's just new ways of thinking about stories and knowing that you can bring those to your community and hopefully be supported in that.
You know, this film took great courage to make on the part of everyone. Ethan, his mother, his family, our dear hospice workers. You know, great art requires great risk. And this film can be very, very difficult at moments, but it's the only film that captures the last breath of an individual from the peak vibrancy of his life to that agonizing moment. And that alone makes it a great work of art. But what of death and psychedelics? I recently wrote an afterword to a book by Albert Hoffman, the inventor of LSD, who died at 104. I had to research Albert's life and family, and he died in a little property outside of Basel in Rittenau, Switzerland, a beautiful tree where he would make schnapps, wine, schnapps from plum trees he had grown, and completely distill it into little glasses of schnapps for visitors. And a marriage of 60 years, a loving marriage. And he and his wife, in their later years, in their 90s, would walk down the property on the border of France, a little bench overlooking France, and each had a tree name for them, each other by the bench, and they would sit there holding hands, knowing that death was imminent, knowing they had a loving family and a long life, and what could be more cherished or beautiful, delicious. And so they passed their last days that way. And now each are buried under their tree, and the bench is still there. Albert was asked, what of death at 103? A great birthday celebration in Basel at his 100th. He said one goes back to the place where one was before one was born. That is all.
I thought I would open it up to you all now to see if anyone has any questions or comments you want to share. Yes?
Yeah, several years ago, I remember watching a documentary on PBS. It was written by a very famous author whose name escapes me, who was into whole foods and the food industry. I don't know if you know what I'm speaking of, but it was about using psychedelics to ease the terminally ill into hospice, into experiencing death. But I guess what concerns me about it all seems very rarefied in that there's so much prejudice against the use of these types of drugs, just like there was 20 years ago for using THC to help ease the pain of arthritis. That when does that happen for everyday normal people who are still now sometimes not even able to get morphine to ease the pain of dying? How do we make that happen? How do we get that down to a level that's not just for people who have lots of money and lots of connections? How do we make that available?
Do either of you want to speak to that?
Yeah, that's a big question, and I think what complicates this situation further, which is not the case for THC, is the significance of set and setting, and the significance of traditional talk-based therapy in combination, and like just taking a bunch of mushrooms isn't necessarily going to do it by itself. It's like the intentions that go into it, the guidance, or even just I guess the kind of like safety and comfort during, and then the conversations and perspective after the whole thing, the ceremony, the ritual, the arc is like so much the experience, and at least from my perspective. And so like if there's a great amount of training and systems, much more need for a regulatory process, I think, than THC. I personally don't think we should just legalize. Like it's not the answer, But at the same time, and I think Leonard's spoken to this a few times when I've interviewed him at conferences, that we're not just handing this off to the medical community, that this isn't just prescription drug manufacturers and doctors, the medical community that controls this. That at the end of the day, it is community-based, that it is within our communities. And we have a great community here in Santa Fe of guides, of people who create sets and settings, who, and the hope is that kind of training and that kind of like social adoption, just community adoption, is something that can happen in alignment with these substances being more readily available.
Thank you, Vince. And of course, we're not suggesting that every dying individual be exposed to a psychedelic. We're simply saying that in some cases, if they're fully informed and ask for it, it may be helpful in cases of existential distress or fear of death to help them overcome that. Morphine won't do it. At the same time, federal regulators are permitting Schedule 1 and 2 compounds, morphine, fentanyl, what have you, anything that eases the distress of the dying individual. Waiver is obtained, and legalization efforts are in effect. Even the Biden administration now has a task force on psychedelics for warfighters, men and women coming back from the Afghan theater that have had extraordinary experiences and have PTSD. A number of them are using ayahuasca, psilocybin, various other substances in this class of compounds to work their way through these fears and horrible memories. There's $1 billion in the last 3 years invested in this industry. So it's not an esoteric thing being whispered over here in the corner. It's mainstream in New York Times, Wall Street Journal, what have you. It's a lot of action right now in this area. At the same time, no drug replaces human touch, human comfort, the sound of one's voice, the pure feeling of being caretaker in those in need. Nothing can substitute for it. But in some instances, the psychedelics may be useful. In town here in Santa Fe, our own Andrew Ungerleider, our niece is Shoshana Ungerleider, MD, who runs a group called Endwell, based in San Francisco. She has homes here in San Francisco. And that has maybe 12,000 people involved in discussing how to die more gracefully, how to assist loved ones through their transition. And part of that discussion is psychedelics, but only part of it. So whatever works. This drug, that drug, these remarkable compounds are that which cannot ever be duplicated as a substance, the human heart.
Does anybody else have any questions to ask or comments they want to share? Yeah.
I'm interested in all of you after you had the experience, this young man's death. What did it tell you to do in your lives after it happened? Did it have anything specific for you the next day or every day?
Well, yeah, I was present during the filming process, so I wish I could have had you guys there too to join our community. And it's pretty incredible because we have Ethan's death doula here, Aditi, over there, and Greg, who was also a death doula supporter for Ethan. Honestly, what became abundantly clear to me was community, first and foremost. That this is, as Leonard just said, human touch and human voice and being at the bedside with the dying. I had a profound, agonizing fear of death before I started this project. And, Aditi and Greg were two of the people who made me feel more comfortable exploring this, terrain, if you will, and then everything cohered, or if you will, with getting to be with Ethan during this 2-week period. So I think for me, assuaging my loneliness or my inability to situate in the world sort of came with this work, with learning about this moving through some of the fear that I had. And, you know, that's honestly been a calling in moving forward with this project and trying to spread Ethan's message, and that's what we're trying to do around this impact and education work. And honestly, after we filmed Ethan, this organization formed in Asheville with Aditi and Greg as two of the leaders and the founders, and it's called the Center for Conscious Living and Dying. And so it's basically your question, everything you could ever wish for is there, you know, for me, in terms of what I've tried to do and learn about how to kind of live my life with more integrity, more fully. I don't know if either of you want to share anything about your experience with Ethan.
For me, caring for Ethan, in a way that was so present and so honest. He was so real and so courageous in the face of death. And I think partly it was because of all the practice he had had with these plant medicines that had supported him in his living and days. So for me, it was rare to experience walking alongside someone with such open heart and open mind to the journey. And it was transformative because in that space of the mystical and the oneness that I experienced at the bedside of him, I couldn't really imagine, I didn't go back to the way I was doing death care before. So it changed me. That's all.
I would say that it's already been touched on more than once, and I would just echo what I've heard, and that is, in working in the way that we worked with Ethan, the communal aspect is pivotal. I've laughed with Scott about this, and he asked me to describe the film after I first saw it. And I said, well, it reminds me that just as Ted Lasso is not a series about soccer, this film, The Last Ecstatic Days, is not a film about death. That's how it feels for me. And what was created was the communal, loving touch, presence that is just so important in our season of dying, in our season of looking within, psychedelics or not, the human touch, the remembrance that I'm dancing with you. And that's in the old way, and that is not coming as a guide, I'm dancing with you. We're together, and you see me and I see you, and I'm still here, and that ability to have that relationship was very measurable with Ethan, and so many others, as well, but I think that's what I would say.
Does anybody else have any questions or anything you want to share? I guess I would ask you all, since you've had a chance to dialogue so long, at different points in time around your respective work. What do you feel is, the future for your collaboration or for the work that you're doing around storytelling? Is there a yearning to tell any new story, and perhaps has it been inspired about a psychedelic experience or a loss that you have? And I'm mindful of the fact that it's rare. Here we are in this monumental art space, and as you said, Vince, this is kind of born out of a death that one of your collaborators experiences.
Yeah, it's actually, So this space is Rainbow, and this is a space that is in honor of Matt King, who's one of our co-founders, brilliant, lived in a sort of courageous way about the future, possibility. There was nothing impossible to Matt, and it was an energy that kind of helped make Meow Wolf what it is. On the day that he passed, last summer, for those in Santa Fe, I don't know if you remember, incredibly bright double rainbow happened right at the place that he chose to take his life. And it was like just too much. It was just like such an acknowledgement. And like Matt loved rainbows. I mean, he was just like, that was his aesthetic, was rainbows. When you walk through the space here, and you have that space with the glowing trees, the glowquarium, the sort of glowing multicolored trees, like that's Matt's space. Or the venue in the back, with all of that was Matt's space. So this space is in honor of that, but the entire House of Eternal Return, this entire project is largely in response to and driven and created from the energy of another person who passed away named David Lockridge, who we basically just, the mourning process for us with David resulted in us wanting to live in honor of him, wanting to live in his memory, wanting to be in collaboration with him, even after he was after he had passed. And about a month before he passed away, he said it'd be so cool if we had a chance to work with George R. R. Martin, and we had no idea how to make that happen. And about 3 months after he passed, I was sitting in front of George R. R. Martin to ultimately kick off this project, and the story of the House of Eternal Return is a story about a family that loses their son and attempts to resurrect them, and in the process of resurrecting their son, portals open into a space of imagination, and it's kind of an exploration. It's also inspired by Terence McKenna's idea of a singularity or a novelty theory. What happens when the graph goes vertical and there's no more time and there's no more space? What does that look like? Where do we go? What's this fifth world? And so that's kind of like what the project is really about, is what's the world beyond? And so, that's the stories that we have been telling, and that's still honestly the story that I want to continue to tell. It's a story that human trajectory, or not even human trajectory, but the trajectory of consciousness has been one of not only experiencing the fidelity of reality, but then creating from the imagination a reality through that, and that is ultimately leading to a point of singularity where there is no time and space anymore, and we are just fully in the realm of dream. That dream is destiny. That's the story that I'm really obsessed with and want to continue to tell for the rest of my life.
Amen to that.
Goodness, I hardly know how to end this. The stars are going out, one by one. Nuclear fusion reactions in distant galaxies are consuming their fuel. Even the universe is dying. It will get colder, greater empathy, entropy, greater darkness. Yet there is a light, an eternal light. Whether we have faith or not, the light goes on. And in human form, the light is in the hearts of the people, us, and shining particularly bright on this special moment, this day, in the hearts of Dee Dee and Greta and Linda Clara, who brought a very difficult, perhaps most important moment into a distributable way so people can see. Many people never see a dying process up close, and on this screen we are present. That alone is a great gift. And so on this day, I simply honor those that have seen too much and come along to tell us about it. And I thank you for that privilege. Tonight, Aditi, I think, is doing kirtan at Clara's house and perhaps on a harmonium. And kirtan is practiced by Hindus and Sikhs. And it's the call and response in Sanskrit, ancient Sanskrit, of phrases that summon us to the Godhead. Kirtan means praise. And so this singing, which starts out as a very soft one-liner, Ganesha, Purinam, Ganesha, and in another hour you might have 40 or 50 people really resounding with this kind of ecstasy, resonance going back and forth, and praise as we all rush to the Godhead together. Quite an exercise. Even though in death all religions are equal, as we are all equal. I just thank you for the privilege of hearing your voices today.
Yes, so I think we're to the conclusion of this conversation. To Leonard's point, we're going to be here, or a lot of us are here from Asheville with the film, and we're going to be here the rest of the week through the weekend. And we just want to say we'd love to co-create community with you all. You know, starting tonight, if you want to come to the kirtan at Clara's place, just let us know and we can give you the details. And you know, beyond that, we are trying to really move this film out in the world, just like what Vince said. And you know, it's very. You know, when I got to hear about Meow Wolf's story, it was probably one of the biggest artistic inspirations I've had, because I lost my music partner to suicide. And I'm still trying to collaborate with him to this day. And you know, some years ago, I was doing an artist residency, and I said it was Meow Wolf for climate change. You know, now we're talking with one of our collaborators, and we're saying this is Meow Wolf for death consciousness. You know, and I just wanted to call him and Nate Taylor, because as I mentioned to you, Leonard, you know, you're his biggest role model, and right now he's caring for our dying friend in Asheville who can't be here. You know, and she said when she met with the DDME, her name is Katie Fisher, she said, I don't know how long I have left, but I'm making it my mission to help get this film out in the world. So it's pretty remarkable that we're premiering during her dying season, and that Nate is with her back home right now. So just want to say thank you all for being with this film, and we're going to be doing everything we can to launch it into the world. And we have Eva here who's helping to spearhead our impact efforts, and you know, I hope that you all will introduce yourself to her afterwards and hear about what we're up to, and just, you know, thank you for being part of our family. Thank you guys.